Okay, so wonderful. Welcome to the first session in Taste of the Infinite, an introduction to themes in Jewish mystical theology. I'm so excited you could join us. So the main orienting question that I want to motivate this session is, how can we have a thing called Jewish mysticism? And I want to kind of dwell on that for a second with us, because mysticism, I think, and a common understanding of it is something that is about spirituality, strictly about spirituality, about the ways in which all religions really are, they're all one, man, and everything's really the same. But how is that able to jibe with I would say, the particular aspects of what it means to be in Judaism, namely to have Torah, to have a specific set of stories that we are attached to and that we adhere to, that we find inspiration from, and which bring us to where we are now. And last but not least, the central aspect of what it is to be Jewish is just to keep the commandments, right? To keep the mitzvot. And those are also particular forms, right? Certain things we need to do with our bodies that is supposed to in some way be either good or bad, depending on the nature of the act, right? And all that seems to have tension with mysticism, in which we are attending to the spiritual unity that's behind difference, right? The spirit that exists within matter, the way in which God actually is the only real thing, and the world really isn't really, it's just a veil of tears. It's just a dream that we're all having together, right? So how is it that Judaism and mysticism can actually exist together? Not just exist together, but produce something as compelling and as amazing as Kabbalah, which we will see over the next 3 weeks after this session. So let's first start dipping our toes in what it is that we call mysticism. I'm going to share the screen, and it should show up for you right now. Fantastic. Okay. So can everyone see that? Great. Okay. So I'm going to draw for my first thought actually from an important medieval Catholic theologian, but don't tell on me. But one of his classic definitions of mysticism, although interestingly found in the in a reception of his writing rather than in his actual writing, he defines mysticism as cognitio Dei experimentalis, which means thinking of God experientially. And here what we have is the combination of these two ideas, namely that we are thinking of God, right? That we're able to apprehend God in some way with our intellect, with our mind, but that kind of thinking is experiential. That the kind of thinking is empirical in some way. It's done through the way that we experience something. And I think that's something that's actually quite radicalizing, but not something that's totally new, because if we follow down a little bit, we see a verse in Psalms that we say every Shabbat morning that is taken to be really a watchword amongst Jewish mystics, namely, Ta'amu ur'u ki tov Hashem, taste and see that the Lord is good. It's the tasting in which you're able to realize the goodness of God. Now here I want to just take a pause for a second, and please, I really do want to invite discussion. What is it that we're able to know through the sense of taste? Right? We know that like 95% of information that we get as human beings is visual, right? And taste and see that the Lord is good, right? When you say, oh, I see, it means you know something, you get something. But what kind of information do we get through the sense of taste? What's different about taste than seeing? And that's a real question. So please jump in, unmute yourself, and jump in.
It's more visceral.
Say more.
Like when something tastes good, like you have emotions around it. You're like, that's amazing. And when something tastes bad, it's like you get physically ill. It's a lot more. There's a lot more of your body that reacts to like a taste sensation than just looking at something.
Okay, right. When you see something offensive, it doesn't like ruin you. But if you taste something that tastes off, not only is it like a terrible experience, but also like it literally has an impact on your body, right? You actually get sick if you eat something that's like been spoiled or something like that. Okay, so there's something more immediate about taste than there is about seeing, right? It actually has a lasting impact on you. Great, that's fantastic. Any other ideas? Yeah.
I'd say it's also more internal. Like you're taking it in,
Mm.
seeing things as an observer, as a witness. Everything's outside of you. But when you're tasting something, you're taking it in. You're making it a part of yourself.
Wow. Yeah. Fantastic. Right. Seeing something, if it's something offensive again, you can just close your eyes. Right. It's over. You don't see it anymore. But tasting something, you literally are metabolizing it. Right. You are synthesizing it and you. You're bringing it into you. The enzymes in your body are breaking down, are incorporating it into you. Digestion, interestingly, actually ends up becoming a major metaphor, especially in Hasidic theology, in the way to think about the way that God, in a sense, works God's way through the world. It's seen as like digestion, like we're able to identify certain aspects of divinity in the world, but through this kind of metabolistic relationship to it. It's a great idea that you're actually internalizing it. You're bringing the thing into you. Now, I mean, let's then push that back to the Psalms verse. I mean, again, Thomas Aquinas aside, we don't observe the Eucharist, right? We don't literally taste God and bring God inside of us. But there's something metaphorical that's being described here, that there is some kind of unity that's happening. We're able to bring something of divinity inside of us. We're able to incorporate it and internalize it. Great, fantastic. Okay, maybe one more idea about taste. If someone's got it brewing, someone's got it on the tip of their tongue.
As any chocoholic knows, taste can bring total joy, but it can also bring complete revulsion. So it's very all-encompassing.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. There's a range of experience that you get with taste that you don't get with just seeing, unless you're like a very sensitive person and you like see an incredible painting of like Turner or something, right, in the museum, and like overwhelms you with the majesty of nature and the magnitude of the created world and the smallness of the human being, right? You feel the sublime that it's supposed to evoke, right? But that's like if you're like trained in art. But with taste, right, you go to like you go to a restaurant and you eat something and it just like it blows your mind, right? It completely changes the way you're existing in this world. So there's something incredible about this, the intimacy and the intensity that taste entails, which then again bringing us back to the way in which, and we're saying that that exact kind of metaphorical dynamic exists with relating to God as well. That mysticism, or like this verse that is very inspirational for Kabbalah, sees taste, right, that kind of intensity and that immensity, as being a way to relate to God. It's not just theoretical, right? It's experiential. They're able in some way to come into contact with God, not just as an idea, but in some way with who you are, where you are, what you are. Okay.
Josh, can I add something?
Please.
So I think it's interesting that you named the class A Taste of the Infinite, and you're starting this with taste, because I think it doesn't say eat and then see that God is good. It says taste, which means that you really just need a tiny bit to, right? It's not saying like, have a full meal. Like you just really need to have a little bit, or sort of sense a little bit of what God is, to see that God is good. So you don't really need to, I don't know. Is that why you named this class A Taste of the Infinite? Because it's just like a small sample, right? Like this is just like.
No.
I'm actually reminded. It's Sarah jumping in.
Great. Wonderful.
I'm actually reminded of the mitzvah on Erev Shabbos to taste your food before Shabbat too, because it's important that it tastes good. And again, that's another way that we experience Hashem, through the pleasure of Shabbos.
Oh, wow. Okay, so two ideas I just got from both of you. I mean, so many ideas, but two that I just want to highlight. One is from what Renee was saying, is that taste in some ways helps us identify like the relationship between the finite and the infinite, right? Tasting a little bit of something still gives us like a hint of the larger bit of something, right? So to taste something implies something greater that we're actually not able to fully incorporate. So it actually kind of notes both the presence, but also the absence, right? The excess of what we're able to actually directly come into touch with. And then from what Sarah was saying, I think, interestingly, it puts you in the driver's seat a little bit, taste, right? Because taste is a judgment. You taste something and you make a judgment about whether it's good or bad or what have you. You say, listen, God is always good. Yeah, fine, great. But tasting means that we have some, in our relationship, we have some kind of agency, right? It's not just that, like, it's not just flavor and see that God is good. It's taste. We're doing something, as a range of ways of reacting to it. We're in it, right? We're in it, and our reactions are important because it tells us something. Great, fantastic. All right, I do want to move a little bit though. That's okay. But these are incredible insights, and really, Mamish, taste of the infinite, taste of all the insights we have in here. So Rufus Jones is from the early 20th century, one of like the classic interpreters of mysticism as such, and it's worth noting, right? Mysticism, and here's like again the tension that I want to explore in this class. Mysticism is a specific term that was developed in the early modern period in France regarding Catholicism. So mysticism is a foreign term that we are still in some way saying, it's a relevant term that we can apply to Judaism. But to do that, interestingly, we end up believing mysticism, right? That mysticism says, there's this religion that's really the core of all religions, that God transcends all faiths, that God is really beyond all these categories, da-da-da-da-da-da. So you have to, in a sense, buy into it first. But that's why, actually, interestingly, with a lot of the earlier scholars of mysticism, they had a lot of trouble with Judaism and also with Islam. Namely, how can you look at a religion that's so embodied, right, that involves so many specific things you have to do, like go in a box for 7 days, right, or shake a tree for a while, and be like, oh yes, that's of course spirit transcending matter, right? But with Judaism, the question is, can we both have, in a sense, our cake and Shabbos too? Can we have the spirit and also the body, not one against the other, but actually two of them working together? So that's exactly the kind of the motivational challenge I want to look at. So Rufus Jones says, I shall use the word mysticism to express the kind of religion that puts the emphasis on the immediate awareness of relation with God, on direct and intimate consciousness of the divine presence. It is religion in its most acute, intense, and living stage. Now, obviously, not exactly a neutral observer. He is invested. He's a scholar of mysticism. He has an interest in it being the best part of religion. But he's saying, in a sense, mysticism is exactly what religion is trying to be. And here, he's inheriting a certain kind of theory of religion. Namely, we see from Max Weber, the 19th century sociologist, that religion starts with a charismatic figure in the beginning who compels everybody with his incredible, his direct relationship with God. And then religion becomes ossified, it becomes systematized, it becomes a synagogue, right? It becomes a foundation, it becomes a federation, right? With a board of trustees. And then they have to, have articles of articulation and da-da-da-da-da, right? It becomes a business, it becomes a job. And you get farther and farther away from that original contact with God. But mysticism is the kind of religion that says, no, 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 no. I want to keep that contact with God because that's really the point. That's really the heart and the essence of what religion is that contact with God. But again, I want to draw our attention to the fact that Jones, not knowledgeable of Judaism, not a Jewish scholar himself, when he says that puts the emphasis on immediate awareness of God, that immediacy ends up being, again, our bugbear. Because Judaism is full of mediation. It's full of text. It's full of commentaries. It's full of liturgies. It's full of rituals and ceremonies. All of these are mediations, right? These are tools that we use to practice our religion. So we have, again, this interesting tension. Direct and intimate consciousness, right? Again, all of these things about like everything getting obliterated out of it and all you have is just the oneness of God. Does that work if what you're doing is like steiging Gemurah, right? Does that work if what you're doing is looking at specific things for specific reasons? And here I think I want to see we're going to explore, is this a contradiction, right? Is this a stira, as we say in Jewish learning world? Or is this rather a really fruitful kind of tension that ends up generating something really powerful? I'm going to, with all due respect to Gershom Scholem, I'm actually going to move past his, but I'll distribute the text at the end of the series, at the end of the class, and you can look at the stuff on your own, do some chazara, do some review, etc. Okay, I want to look at really one of the most amazing, subtle, but also complex texts, and I want to look at it together. So this is a selection from the Pardes Rimonim, the Orchard of Pomegranates, by Moshe Cordovero, who was a 16th century Jewish mystic from Sfas, right, from Safed. Okay, and he was part of the Sfat Renaissance of all these Kabbalists that gravitated to the Galilee in the 16th and 17th centuries. So he is going to say something very complex, but that's why we're going to look at it together. I just want you to just kind of let it simmer, let it just wash over you a little bit, and we're going to figure it out together. Okay. He says, the words are intentionally confusing. The cause of revelation is the reason of concealment. And the cause for concealment is the reason of revelation. Don't worry, again, doesn't make sense. Don't worry. When powerful light is concealed and enclosed in a garment, it is revealed. Okay, now that should make sense to us. Namely, how can you ever see colors of light? Light is white, or rather colorless, or rather colorful, because light in its pure white light form contains every single visible color in it. The only way, though, that you can see those colors is through refraction. In other words, through concealing the light. Red light is only visible because the other non-red parts of it have been blocked from being diffracted. So light is only able to become visible when there's something in the way. Now that's also true in general. If you turn on a light, but there's nothing in the room, you don't see anything. You need something in the way for light to illuminate. So light only becomes visible when it is enclosed in a garment. Imagine a light so bright that you can't see it, but the only way that you can take it in is through gels or by putting on sunglasses, right? In some way diffusing the light, in some way lessening its intensity, because too much light you can't see, blinds you. Okay, so though concealed, the light is actually revealed. For were it not concealed, it could not be revealed. This is one of the main and central dynamics that is common in Kabbalah. The connection between concealing something and disclosure, between hiding something and revealing it. That it is only through, in a sense, hiding something that something can come into the world. Now let's let that just simmer on our back burner for a second, because we'll think of the ways that that applies in a moment. But let's keep on moving. It says, this is like wishing to gaze at the dazzling sun, right? This is, in rabbinic literature, they use what's called a mashal, a metaphor, okay, to help us understand. It's like looking at the sun. Its dazzle conceals it, right? You look right at the sun, you're blinded because you can't look at its overwhelming brilliance. But when you conceal it, you look at it through screens, and by screens, what he means are sunglasses, right? If you look at it through lenses, through screens, though, you can see and not be harmed. Now, I think we all remember a certain infamous picture of a certain world leader who was looking directly at the eclipse, and how you're not supposed to do that because you go blind. All right. The only way you're supposed to look at the eclipse is if you're able to wear these special lenses that make sure that the heightened and concentrated light is not going to harm you, right? It's not going to hurt your retina. So it's only by concealing the light that you're able to see it. So it is with emanation. By concealing and clothing itself, another major metaphor they use is the garment, right? The garment as the vessel for revelation. It reveals itself. Let's use a social metaphor. If you went into the street butt naked, you would be immediately squirreled away, probably arrested. The only way you're able to reveal yourself in society is through concealing yourself, namely wearing clothes. Use another social metaphor. You meet someone on a first date, and you immediately start talking about all your childhood traumas. And you also say, you give them a 25-minute lecture about how great the show Lucifer is on Netflix. Eventually, they run away. The reason is because to reveal yourself to someone, you also need to conceal yourself. You share your dissertation on Lucifer until you're 2 years into the relationship. You don't share your most intimate and heartfelt secrets until you've built a sense of rapport. It's through concealing ourselves that we're able to actually reveal ourselves. So that's true on a human experiential level, and all the more so when it comes to God, that we have this dialectic. And when we say dialectic, we're using it in the technical sense, meaning opposites that work together, right? The tension that generates. It's a dialectic of revelation and concealment. God can only come into the world by concealing God's self. Now that makes sense to anyone who's seen Indiana Jones, right? If God revealed God's self fully, our faces would melt, or whatever happens in the movie. God needs to conceal God's self to make sure that there is room enough for a human being. Because if God revealed God's self in God's fullness, the world couldn't stand it. Now there's a famous midrash. Midrash is like a rabbinic story or legend, a way of understanding the Torah, that talks about the pre-created period. And it says that God actually created and destroyed worlds upon worlds upon worlds before creating this existence. And that ends up becoming a seed for this mystical idea that God had to find a balance between God's magnitude and the ability for us to receive it. For there to be a created world, God needed to make room for there to be someone else, something else. That means God needs to make space. God needs to conceal. Okay, it's only through concealing that revelation can occur. Now when we talk about revelation, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is Torah. Revelation of the Torah. God reveals the Torah, but in this way, we think God also conceals God's self as the Torah is revealed. Or the Torah is the concealing of God, that God is tucked away inside somewhere in the Torah for us to find. So now we're starting to see, I think, a different kind of dynamic when it comes to a mystical relationship to Judaism, that it's not against the particulars, but it's through them. That the particulars, the specifics, are the way for the infinite to manifest itself. But because we're not infinite, we actually can't receive the thing in its entirety. Instead, what we need are aspects, or what's called, especially in Hasidic literature, bechinot, dimensions, avatars, ways in, or interestingly, facets, like the prism, ways to understand it depending on situation. So, pause, thoughts, confusion, objections, excitements. Just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Also,
hi, Josh.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, sorry. It's Sarah.
No, hey.
It's this interesting, even from the point of view of how Kabbalah and Kabbalistic concepts were even introduced, later in terms of to the general masses, if you want to put it that way, in human history. Like, it was kind of kept, like, Kabbalistic ideas and stuff were really kept only for the most learned until around the Hasidic movement, 300 years ago or whatever. So it definitely makes sense in the grand scheme of, like, how sometimes these things take their time to be revealed, or
Okay.
even in history.
Oh, okay. Oh, and very interesting. So you're saying history, in a sense, is the playing out of this relationship between concealment and revelation, that things reveal themselves over time. Yeah. So, like, in terms of the, like, restriction or the esotericism, right, the secrecy of Kabbalah, it makes a lot of sense in the sense that you think about, like, you don't throw a freshman physics major into a quantum physics, like, PhD class, right? That you need to actually develop yourself first before you're able to go to the advanced stage. Similarly here, I think that's exactly right, right? We're talking about a building of a relationship such that more and more and more is able to be revealed. More and more is able to come into contact with. Okay. So here I want to move to a Hasidic text, as Sarah mentioned. So Hasidism, right? And we'll talk about all these, not only that, but also eventually we'll actually have a full systematic introduction to Jewish mysticism in the winter and the spring. So keep your eyes peeled. But Hasidism, yeah, is a modern Eastern European Jewish mystical movement. The Vitebsker, Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, he wrote a book called the Priya Aretz, one of the early Hasidic rabbis. So from the mid to late 18th century. And here he has, like a lot of Hasidic books, is a commentary on the Torah portion, but really it's a launching pad for something much more, much bigger than that. So he's commenting here on the verse, the pasuk, about counting the Omer, right? The Omer is the period between Passover and Shavuot, right? 49-day period between the holiday of liberation and the holiday of the revelation of the Torah. So again, we're in this very interesting, very meaningful period. So he says, and you shall count from the day after the Sabbath. And by day after the Sabbath, I mean after the first day of the holiday. So in the Zohar, which is the pièce de résistance of medieval Kabbalah, right? It says, Israel, when they were in Egypt, were in the other domain, united in impurity, like a woman who dwells in the days of impurity. Now, I decided not to omit this and clean up the text because I want to actually be like honest about what's in there, and not only that, but show the ways in which major Jewish themes and halachic legal topics end up becoming relevant also in Kabbalah. Now here what we're referring to is what's called Nidah. And Nidah is the Jewish ritual relationship to menstruation. And in menstruation, there's what's called impurity, although that's a really bad English translation, but it's the most common one. Because tameh, or tuma, which is translated that way, means the aspect that is supposed to have distance from the sacred. That when tuma and impurity comes into contact with the sacred, bad things happen. So, but it's really important to note, as feminist Bible scholars like Tikva Freimer-Kensky of blessed memory and others have written, tuma in the Bible does not have a moral dimension. It's not about being bad or wicked. It is a certain state. And you are not sinful to be in that state. Everyone is tameh. Everyone is impure. If you run across a carcass in the road, you are impure. If someone dies in your house, you are impure. It is a normal, natural part of life, and that's totally fine. Okay. But here we have, and it's, again, this literally natural cycle of life. We're talking about this. But here it ends up accreting certain, let's say, cosmic significance, that this tuma, right, this impurity as such, ends up being related to the other side. The other side being, we'll talk about all of this later, the dark side, right? The dark side of the force. I think we all have general kind of ideas about that. So, it says, the matter is known to believers, that spirituality, vitality, and holy sparks are present in everything material, utterances, thoughts, and desires. So there is divinity, right? There's holy sparks in everything. And that's the line that the Vitebsker has following his saying, there's this other side which isn't supposed to touch God. But at the same time, God is in everything. There's nothing that God isn't in. God is in everything physical. God is in every word that is said. God is in every thought that is had. God is in every desire that you have. All is from the hand of God, who dwells within them truly, and without whom there would be no matter or form, taste, or reason, or smell. All would be dead corpses without God's existence. Okay. So here what we have is what we can call like a vitalistic interpretation. Namely, God is the life force that courses through everything. That there is a connection between the cause and the effect, and without that ever-present connection, what exists would wither away and be dissipated. There wouldn't be anything ever again. It would be all gone. Things only are because their divine vitality, right? God's life force is inside of them. Everything otherwise would be a dead husk, without it. Nothing. All their existence and doings in the world are due to God's own holy vitality in the life of life, Chayei HaChaim. As it says, B'chol drachecha da'ehu, know God in all of your ways. That 3-line section of a biblical verse becomes the banner of the entire Hasidic movement. It is one of the most commonly cited verses of the Baal Shem Tov, of the founder of Hasidism, and part of the Hasidic revolution. Namely, there is sacredness, there is divinity present in everything, and the challenge then of the Chassid is to figure out how to find it. Now, this is an incredible idea, and it's a beautiful thought, namely that God is in some way present in everything, even in the places that we wouldn't expect to find God. Right? Again, we started with this idea of the other side, the other domain, the demonic realm even. And yet, God is in everything. Now, I want to put our finger on the pulse here. So, the human being is essential in this because it's the human being that's able to access and locate the divinity in everything. However, since it's in everything, without difference, how then can we uphold this religion of Judaism, which is based on fundamental distinctions? Kosher, treif. Usser, mutter, right? Forbidden, permitted. Lots of other distinctions. But those are the big ones, right? Tameh, tahor, pure, impure, right? Kadosh, chol, sacred and profane, right? Sacred and secular. These differences are blurred. These differences are combined. There's no difference anymore. If God is in everything, how can we say that there can really have anything? Why can't I have a cheeseburger, right? Why can't I have my non-kosher cake and Shabbos too, right? So there's a reason that Hasidism especially generated a whole lot of controversy. But this kind of a controversy is often a controversy that tends to respond to and react to mystical movements, because it is common, I think, to many mystical movements to find divinity, to find God where you don't expect it, specifically in the places where either it's just neutral, right? Or even in the places which are seen as sinful or wicked or something like that, right? The most radical forms of mysticism we have seen, like the messianic movement of Shabtai Tzvi or of Jacob Frank in the 17th and 18th centuries, which end up being deemed heretical because they go way too far, because they do see no difference between things. Shabtai Tzvi, famously, before eating pork, said the blessing, Baruch Atah Hashem, Matir Isurim. And that's a great pun to people who come early to Shabbos morning davening. Because here's the pun. The pun is that every morning in the liturgy, you say the blessing, Baruch Atah Hashem, Matir Asurim, which means God who loosens the chains of those who are bound. But the way that Shabtai Tzvi does a little medrash on it, does a little taich on it, he says, Matir Isurim, who permits the forbidden. And he saw sinning as a holy act because God is in everything, right? So then what's the difference? Isn't my role then to delve into, no, this is actually this is not just like a joke in the sense that it actually works. I mean, it's heretical, but it works. It's compelling, theoretically. Namely, it is my role as the mystical virtuoso to delve into the demonic realm and find the sparks there. And how do I do that? How do I rescue God from the other side? The answer is eating pork. Right? If I'm able to go and have contact with the forbidden thing, I can locate, identify, and rescue the divine within the demonic. Right? It is a radicalizing of this idea that God is in everything, in all of your ways. no God. So we have then this really productive tension between mysticism and Judaism. And to repeat that tension, mysticism as a movement of spirit in which divinity is seen as existing undifferentiatedly in all things, and Judaism, a really neat religion which is fundamentally founded on particular categories and behaviors and texts. Can we have this combination of the universal and the particular, of the spiritual and the material? That's the challenge I think the Kabbalah took up, and it produced something amazing with it. So let's zoom all the way back to the Torah and figure out how that was pulled off in the next 20-ish minutes. But before I do that, as we are so excited to do it, thoughts, objections?
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
okay. Sorry. Something that came to my mind is that just because we can go to that side, if we're thinking about sides to extremes, doesn't mean we should.
Okay, so you're saying there's a moral aspect in which, yes, one could, right? But the question is it wise?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so like Shabtai Tzvi was right in theory, but you know, he shouldn't do it. But that's why Shabtai
Right.
Tzvi was great, though, right? He was the one who could do it.
I mean, I don't know if he was even right in theory. Like, I feel like, for example, Queen Esther, when she was in a situation that doesn't seem to come from Hashem, right? She was like trapped and had to be queen to a non-Jewish king. She still tried to eat kosher, you know, in the palace. So it's like, I feel like that's more an example of taking the sparks out of the other side, because that's just a situation that she had no control over, and yet she still tried to keep the Torah as much as possible. Whereas Shabtai Tzvi, I mean, he was obviously either possessed or really truly a rebel against Hashem, right?
His name is Shabtai, which is the Hebrew word for Saturn, and in actually like alchemical stuff and early modern science, Saturn, the planet, going all the way back to Galen, is associated actually with melancholy and the demonic.
Oh, wow.
Interesting stuff there. But I would say, I mean, I wouldn't say obviously. Remember, like half the Jewish world was like, at least let's say a soft Sabbatean in the 17th century. It didn't win, but it was compelling to people. And part of the thing I like to do is try to figure out, I don't agree with Shabtai Tzvi. I want to make that very clear to the Beth Lita board. I don't agree with Shabtai Tzvi, but I think it's important to see how things are compelling so that we can see why people respond to them the way they do. I heard another voice. I wanted to chip something in.
Yeah. Just to make sure I'm getting, from what I'm hearing, we are talking about mysticism, which is the taste of divinity, and divinity is a whole thing. It's in everything and is in everywhere. It seems that to understand it at more street level, there is a duality of things, which is the good, the bad, the permitted things and not permitted things, the same way that there is light and darkness, when in fact, darkness doesn't even exist. It's just absence of enough light. Is that the way that we can understand how to go through that mystic experience?
Yeah, so I want, instead of saying, good, like let's solve it, I want to stay with that tension. That's exactly where I want us to be, right? So I think you articulated it quite articulately. Oh my God. You articulated it quite nicely. Namely, you said there is this, seems like a conflict between this idea that divinity is in everything, and yet the way that we experience reality, or I'd say also the religion of Judaism, is founded on fundamental distinctions. And then you started to push back and say, but if you look at, for instance, darkness and light, right? What about, you know, I'll pick it up like a quantum physics kind of way, right? What about luminous darkness, right? What about, right, the way in which dark matter actually, the most famous paper that, what's his face, who wrote A Short History of Time? Stephen Hawking wrote was called Do Black Holes Burn White Hot? And his claim was actually that black holes too actually emit energy. So there might not be a difference so much between darkness and light. You're right. But instead of just like skipping ahead and saying, mysticism solved that problem, instead I actually want to say that is a problem, because the political nature of that claim is problematic. Namely, that if you're going to say everything is one, then what ends up happening to minority religions? What ends up happening to religions that are, like going back all the way to ancient world, right? The break of early Christians from Judaism had to do with whether there was a covenant of the flesh or a covenant of the spirit, right? And Paul ends up saying, listen, when it says circumcise, it doesn't mean your flesh, it means your heart. In other words, what we see as literal is really all metaphorical. Spirit overtakes dead letter. But Judaism, as such, holds on to the Torah, holds on to the mitzvos, holds on to the meaning of the particular things as being spiritual and significant. And I think that pushes back on like a simple understanding of mysticism as undifferentiated spirit that overtakes all. And I think a mystical Judaism or a Jewish mysticism is a really interesting synthesis, and we're going to see what it does, okay? So let's zoom all the way back to Devarim, all the way back to Deuteronomy. A very important pasuk says, if you keep all this instruction, mitzvah, which I have commanded you to do, to love Hashem your God, walk in God's ways, and cleave to God. Uledovka bo. Ledovka bo is where the word dveikut comes from. Dveikus. Dveikut, means to cleave to God, and it's the word that Kabbalah uses to refer to contact between us and God, even in its most radical forms, union between us and God. Okay? So in this it says, if you keep the Torah, walk in God's ways, then you will have connection with God. They're not counterposed, they go together. So how can the observance of these specific things that we call mitzvot, how can they actually feed into connection with the infinite? Right? That's the motivating question. So here's a very famous and a beautiful commentary from Nachmanides, mid-13th century Spanish Jewish mystical commentator and rabbi. First, like he often does, he picks a fight. And he says, so Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra, an earlier Spanish commentator, wrote, at the end of one's life, that's when you cleave to God. And this is a great secret. And he leaves it very terse. I looked at the original source, that's all he says. But his idea seems to be, when can you transition from life to spirit, from the particular to the divine? When you die, right? When your spirit leaves your body, when you re-enter the source of life, that's when you get to cleave to God. In other words, when can't you cleave to God in this world? Right? This world, it's not for it. It's just too little. Ramban, Nachmanides, pushes back and he says, no. Yes, it's a great secret, but not for the reasons you think. Lest one think that it means that one should love God and walk in God's ways until one is able to cleave to God at the end. Right? Ibn Ezra's commentary says that walking in God's ways and cleaving to God are exclusive of each other. Maybe they lead into one another, that walking in God's ways leads you to cleave to God at the end of your life. But it's not the case in Ibn Ezra's reading that you can walk in God's ways and cleave to God at the same time. In other words, can you keep the mitzvot and have that mystical experience? That's the question. He pushes it forward. He says, rather, Ella, its meaning is to call you to attention, not to serve God and another. Worship only God in your heart and in your actions. In your actions, can you also worship God? That is maybe a new idea here. It is possible that this cleaving, dveika, means that one should meditate on and love God in every moment, not to separate one's consciousness from God as you walk in your ways, lie down and arise, which is, he's quoting from the Shema, right? Such that even when you converse with other people, your lips and tongue will be with them, but your heart will be in God's presence. So here he says, he tricks you a couple times. He says, you might think that to cleave to God would mean to meditate on God, to separate yourself from life, to remove yourself from life and just spend all of your time godding around, right? That's all, you're just pure, just God. That's all you're doing. You're in God world. And that there's no place for life. But no, you are actually able to walk in your ways, go to bed, wake up. And that even when you're chatting with people, you're still able to be in touch with God. That you're able to synthesize spirituality into life. That they're not exclusive of each other, but even when you are in the marketplace, you can still in some way be in touch with God. Now, I just want to take a pause. What does that mean to you? If we were to translate that into your own experience, have you experienced something like that in which you found God in the world rather than God as being apart from or against the world? Have you been able to, in this way, also, you talk with somebody, but your heart is with God, bring God into the situation by having God in your heart, and then that's going to influence what's going to come out of your mouth. Right? To have God on your mind as you're dealing with your business means that you're going to treat people very differently than if you didn't have God in the mind, I would hope. Yes, Carol. Oh, you unmuted yourself. I apologize, but I was so excited, but I'm still excited. All right, but have people experienced this synthesizing of divinity in the world?
It's okay. So I feel it when I'm seeing great beauty. I mean, walking along right now with the autumn leaves, which is spectacular. When I lived in Israel in Zichron Yaakov, I mean, every step, it was just splendid. I mean, it was so many kinds of flowers. You know, I was talking to somebody about a bougainvillea, like it's a flower within a flower within a flower. All the colors, the shapes. You just know that to me, it's just like you're aware that there's nothing random about this, that there was a Holy Spirit, a creator that created it and continues to create and continues to put this beauty and this light into the world. That's how I've experienced it.
Okay, so if you found experiences you've had, triggers, right, mnemonics, some kind to actually remind you of God, even maybe bring a sense of divinity into your awareness. Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Maybe one more comment, because I want to make sure, I don't want to lose the last part of this. The last part of this is bringing it home. One more comment about finding God, maybe in your experience. Okay, something just to think about for sure. Okay, so here's a text from the Zohar. Again, pièce de résistance of Kabbalah. Really an incredible text that you can spend a zillion lifetimes learning. So here I think the Zohar asks a really interesting question, but I want to use it as a metaphor. It says, what's the reason for sacrifice of animals? Right? I think that's something we all kind of ask ourselves when we start to read the book of Vayikra, right? It's like, wow, God sure loves barbecue, I guess. This seems really savage. This seems really primal, right? This seems really non-spiritual, that like God wants blood, right? I really like, I think even in the medieval period, they had this discomfort with this, right? Maimonides had a famous response that we needed sacrifices in the beginning of human history because that is what was done. And then eventually we developed prayers. And then Maimonides says, and eventually after prayers, we'll just have silence. So for Maimonides, sacrifice is like seeding something to the world. But Kabbalah is reluctant to say that the things that we encounter are meaningless, right? That the form has no significance. Wouldn't it have been better just for a person to break their spirit and engage in repentance? Why do we need this bloody, visceral barbarism? Can't we just have spirituality? Why do we have matter? Why do we have bodies? Can't we just have our spirits? I really do think that is the question that the Zohar is asking, that the challenge is being made, right? Why do we have to have this primal, like proto-barbecue, this murderous barbecue? Why can't we just have spirituality? Why can't we just be repentant? Why can't we just have our hearts and our minds? Why do they slaughter an animal and burn it in the fire? Right? That seems like something very specific, and not just a specific, but offensive to do. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rashbi, says you ask a good question. And I think that's actually really important he says that. Because he's not saying, you heretic, why don't you love the Torah? He's saying, you're noticing something quite real, and I appreciate that. But the mystery of the sacrifices includes many mysteries, which can be revealed only to the truly righteous, from whom the mystery of their master is not concealed. Now, to go back for a quick second, the key to Ramban's point is that to become a synthesizer of the world and God, you need to transform yourself. Because the key is that people of this kind, their spirits can achieve this even within their lives. Pushing back in Ibn Ezra, you don't need to die to be in touch with God. You can actually have full contact with God in this world. How do you do it? Because they have become a dwelling place for the Shekhinah. Now, another major metaphor concept in Kabbalah that we'll experience is that of the Merkava, the chariot or the seat. And the idea is that you make yourself a Merkava, a seat for God. You make yourself a dwelling place for God. But it's not automatic. You need to make yourself that. It doesn't just happen. It might be a shift of awareness, a shift of morality, a shift of consciousness, whatever it is. But you make yourself a dwelling for God. So going back here, many mysteries which can be revealed only to the truly righteous. By that, what he means is these people who have made themselves God-soaked, right? Who have made themselves connected with God. But interestingly, he also, in a way, I think Rabbi Elazar ends up agreeing with the challenge. He says the sacrifices were necessary because they ended up being secrets. But what he ended up turning the sacrifices into wasn't barbecue, but rather Torah. The approach to this now is not to say mysticism means that the Torah needs to be gotten rid of because all we have is God and spirit, but rather to say mysticism challenges us to find Torah in everything. Sacrifices aren't anymore just something our bodies do to other bodies, but the choreography of it, the specific placement of it, the text surrounding it, they all are trying to show us something, to induce something in us. Much like the beautiful fall foliage, like Lauren was saying, induced an experience of God in her. Sacrifices, learning about them, in some way are supposed to communicate something to us. The whole of reality becomes pedagogical because it all becomes signs, and Renee's quite apt picking up a taste of something bigger. This whole world is a taste of something else, but you can only taste it through the specifics, through the particular is how you get to the spirit. You can't just duck it and you can't cancel it. You have to go through it to get to the divine. Okay, here we have a really fascinating text that we're gonna do on the, as they say in yeshiva, we'll do it outside. We're not gonna do it inside. I'll just kind of give it over. This is from another 16th century, 17th century Kabbalist named Avraham Azulai, who is one of the main conduits for the Lurianic tradition. And in his book, Chesed Avraham, and as we know, all Jewish books are puns after the author's name, he says, basically, why is it that Torah isn't just pure spirituality? Why is it this physical book made out of words with ideas and laws and stories and da-da-da-da-da, all these physical things? Why can't it just be spirit? And he ends up telling a tragic story, namely, after the sin of Adam, he exchanged his bigdei or for bigdei or, his garment of light, right? All of us Leonard Cohen fans hear that, where he got that phrase from, his garments of light for garments of skin. Now, beautiful pun, or with an aleph means light, or with an ayin means skin. So from the Midrash, we already have this beautiful switching around. But what is the sin of Adam in this telling? It is the descent from a being of pure spirit into a being of matter. But it's worth noting, we aren't in the Garden of Eden. We are material, physical, corporeal creatures. We are human beings. Human beings need a Torah of the flesh. We need an embodied Torah because there's no other way into it for us. Spirit is enclosed. Remember we said another major metaphor, garments, clothing, right? Spirit is enclosed, is garbed in matter. The way for us to receive it is in that kind of conduit, that kind of mediation. Or going all the way back to Rufus Jones, said, mysticism is immediate consciousness of God. Well, even he has to admit that he needs the concept of immediacy for it to be immediate. In Judaism, it is not the immediate consciousness of God, but the mediated consciousness of God through these specific tools, these mitzvot, these prayers, these texts. But they're not just something that's supposed to trap us inside of them. They're channels through which God is coursing and through which we're able to reconnect. The enclothing of spirituality and garments of literalism, a metaphor for how the contemplating intellect can comprehend something so subtle. And I just want to, that part's hard to get, but I think what he's saying is, if you were to, when your child asks you about why people die, you tell a certain kind of answer. And when your teenage child asks you why people die, or why there was a flood in Southeast Asia, you tell another kind of answer. And when you are speaking with an adult with whom you can be honest and you can admit your insecurities and fear, you speak about theology in a very different kind of way. As Rav Kook said, for every mashpia, there needs to be a makabel. For everyone who is expressing something, there needs to be someone to receive it. And the person receiving influences and conditions what it is that is expressed and how it is articulated. Torah is pedagogy, because reality in this telling is pedagogy. God is enclothing God's self in ways that we can relate to, so that we can then reconnect with and become inspired, become illuminated, become enlightened. But we need ways that make sense. We need concepts, we need stories, we need laws, we need rituals. All of these things are what I like to call spiritual technology that works. And it works to connect us with something bigger, something greater, something infinite. Okay. Here I want to bring us to our last text, in which the Maggid of Mezrich, the famous disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, really puts his finger on it. He says, the rabbi said, the Holy One wanted to provide Israel with opportunities, and so proliferated for them Torah and mitzvahs. That is to say, the mitzvahs are basically 613, right? The 613 commandments recorded in the Torah. But if a person fulfills the verse, Bechol derachecha da'ehu, know God in all your ways, then one is able to fulfill multitudes and multitudes of 613, infinitely, without end. For all one's actions will be for the sake of heaven. There's a way of looking at Bechol derachecha da'ehu to say the Torah is now useless, because if davening, right, if praying is the same exact thing as me lifting my arm up like this, then why do I pray? Why am I Jewish? I might as well just find God in some kind of way that works for me. I might as well just say religion is meaningless because really God is everywhere. But the Maggid of Mezrich actually wants to flip it on its head and say, no. Instead of saying, because God is everywhere, we should have no Torah. Instead, say, because God is in everything, Torah is now infinite. Torah is now without end, because I'm able to find mitzvos in every single thing that I do. I think here what we have is a really subtle and powerful attempt to reframe the question. Again, in the early scholarship around mysticism in the early 20th century, the idea is that mysticism is the true religion that's without form, without ritual, without practice. It's just pure divinity, pure God. And it's not a coincidence that that ended up corresponding with Protestantism, right? Which is about pure spirit, even getting rid of the rituals of Catholicism. It's really about stripping it down. And it's not an accident that the major scholars of mysticism were all Protestants. None of these things are accidents. And that their aim was to say the true religion is just pure spirit. But what the benefit, I think, of the power of a particularly Jewish mysticism is one that sees the force and the meaning of what it means to have particular things that we are connected to, a Torah that we adhere to, mitzvos that we are commanded to perform, stories and laws which we are attached to and which are ours. But the key is not to become parochial in these things, but rather to go deeply into them such that you actually come out the other side, to see the ways in which what they're trying to do is connect us with something beyond. But the only way to connect with something beyond is through something particular. And that, I think, is another major contribution of Jewish mysticism, or a mystical Judaism. It reminds us that we are not just pure brains in a vat or spirit floating around in space, that we are embodied creatures, that we are both spirit and body, we are both soul and matter, and that the way for our soul to be nourished is through our bodies, that our bodies can actually be a partner in what it is to be spiritual, to be mystical. And I think we know this as Jews, because the experience that we have when we keep the mitzvos, right, when we do the Torah, or when we learn Torah, we feel that we're touching something that's just beyond the words on the page, or just beyond the branches that we're shaking around, or just beyond the animal horn that we're sounding like a trumpet. That these things aren't just random sounds and random acts, but they are ways that God is trying to do something with us, to experience something, to cause us to experience something, to cause us to have a connection with something more. So we see the way in which the infinite and the finite, right, that which is beyond and that which is present, can actually have a cooperative relationship rather than a contradictory one. And that, I think, is a necessary pros door, right? An introductory chamber, right? A hallway that we're going to walk through together so that we can see what it is that a particularly Jewish mysticism is trying to do as we explore Kabbalah together over the next few weeks. So thanks so much for joining. But before we close, thoughts that you have, comments you want to make, ideas you want to share, insights you want to share? I want to make sure, I don't want to take the last word.
I just want to say thank you. I really enjoyed the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Morris. I appreciate it. Great to meet you. Okay, so wait, don't leave yet. Please check the chat for the form to please sign up with your info, because we'd love just to stay in touch with people. I'll post it again. And also, I'll post the source sheet too. So if you want to do some chazara, if you want to do some review, that's where all the real learning happens, as all of us good yeshiva buchrim know. Go. Intro. Good.
Thank you, Josh.
Oh my God.
Really enjoyed
Thanks so much, Joe. I appreciate it.
Really enjoyed your lecture.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
did I. It's Faye. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah. Oh, wait, this is just the. I want to. Yeah, this is just the first. This is really just like just a taste, Mom. This is a taste of the taste. This is just a taste of the taste.
We look forward to the full meal.
Oh, beautiful. Have a great evening. Please just click the link before you sign out. All right, take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Go to that chat thing there to get that form thing.